Well, welcome, Jon Nessle, to Restitutio. So glad to talk with you today.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you.
So we've been talking about bullying and hearing some thoughts on what to do, especially down the line, if you've been bullied.
Yeah.
Where should we pick up?
Well, in our previous conversation, I covered the first few things that I had learned, and those are the things that would be permissible in a secular school situation. But what I want to cover now is the spiritual side of it. I think that, this information should be taught in every school so that children know what to do. They know how to handle defeat. They know how to handle grief and anger in the proper way, because we are taught by media and movies and TV the wrong way to handle it. We're taught that revenge is glorified. And so people have a tendency to think that's the way to get even. And what that does is it just continues the devil's work. It does his work for him. So what we covered before, the secular side of things, is only half of the cure. The other half is dealing with forgiveness and vengeance and prayer and how to achieve genuine healing, because that is what God can do. The secular side will get you part way there, but God will get you all the rest of the way there. And because the biggest bully that exists is the devil. He's the biggest bully. And so if you want to fight him and win, you're going to need a spiritual arsenal. And so the greatest weapon to fight the devil is the Word of God. That is the greatest weapon to fight him. And in the Word, it has the keys to deal with these things, with defeat, with grief, with embarrassment, the things that happen when you are bullied and abused. See, and actually, the greatest teaching on that is in the Sermon on the Mount, believe it or not. Because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was dealing with believers who had been bullied. They were bullied by the Pharisees and they were bullied by the Romans. So they had suffered religious abuse as well as social and physical abuse. Okay? And so the things that Jesus said were cures for that society in that state. See, when you get abused like that, you tend to retreat into yourself. And so he was telling them, let your light shine. Every one of us has a light in us. Every Christian has gifts that are special, that are unique to them. No one else has quite the same gifts as each one of us does. And if we don't do our gift, we'll certainly be missed. And so people need to find out what their calling is and do it, because there's no greater thing in the whole world. And the way you find that out is just get busy. People think, oh, God's going to tell me if I'm a prophet, or God's going to tell me if I'm a teacher or whatever. Sometimes that happens, but in most cases, it happens when you get busy and you find out what you do best. You go where the Lord guides you. And it's sort of like learning how to hit a baseball. When you hit the baseball just right, it sounds different. It feels different, right? And so those who want to learn how to hit the baseball right, they'll practice and they'll try to reproduce that. Well, the same thing happens when we get involved and help people. Just gravitate to need, get involved with your church, Ask the minister, what can I do to help? Just get involved. And as you do that, God will guide you into what your calling is. And see, that will get you out of many situations. Because if God's working in you for that, he'll work in you for a lot of other things too, and that'll produce your deliverance. So that's why Jesus said, let your light shine. That was a solution for people who had been abused. And you're the salt of the earth. You're supposed to season, you're supposed to preserve things, you're supposed to speak up when there's a problem, you're supposed to solve things like salt does. It purifies. And so he said, you're the salt of the earth, and if the salt has lost its savor, well, what's going to happen then? So he was inviting them. He wasn't pushing, he was pulling, he was inviting them out of their situations. So, and I discovered, and when I did my research on the Sermon on the Mount, I discovered Jesus's teaching style, and he gave lists. And when Jesus gave a list, he would give a clue in one of the elements that would decipher it. And so if you utilize that clue to decipher that one element and then reproduce that in all the other elements, then it would unlock the whole list. See, because Semitic teaching is a little bit different than Greek teaching. You had to work for it. In Greek teaching, they would trot out the answers. You'd have to memorize them. And, that's how we learn in our schools today. Those who do well are the ones who can regurgitate the information. But in Semitic learning, you had to work for it. And when you worked for it, the reward was wisdom and understanding. So when Jesus was dealing with people, he said to them, except that your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. And everybody was looking at him with their mouths open, because they were saying, how can we do better than the Pharisees?
Right. These guys,
they were so picky and they were so tight. How could we do better? And so then he told them how. And the next section in the Sermon on the Mount shows how to overcome abuse. Believe it or not. And so the first thing he did in Matthew 5:21 through 26, he said, you've heard it's been said, but I say to you, 6 times in that section. And so it is his list. All right. And in the first one, he gave a clue where he repeated the word brother about 4 times. That's the clue. And so what was happening is he said, you heard it's been said, but I say to you, you've heard it's been said, you shall not kill. And, whoever's killed, whoever does kill is in danger of being judged. But I say to you, he said, whoever's angry with his brother without a cause is in danger of the judgment. And then they were calling their brothers Raka, and also they were calling them fools. Now, what this was actually talking about is the Pharisees were verbally abusing the believers. They were calling them fools. They were calling them Raka. Raka is a word that comes from, it sounds like you're clearing your throat in Aramaic. It's Raka, like that. And it's dealing with it, and it's related to the word spit.
Oh.
So Raka is basically saying, you ain't worth spit. You can't walk for God. You're no good. I'm a Pharisee and I know how to do it, but you don't. Okay. And so they were verbally abusing them. And then they were calling them fools. Now, in our culture, calling somebody a fool, we do that all the time and we don't think much of it. Okay.
Right.
But in their culture, when you called someone a fool, that was about the worst thing you could say, because they were God-centered, and they did what they did because they believed God told them. So if you called them a fool, you were calling their God that they believed a fool too. That's why it was so bad. So, and then what was happening is that these Pharisees were bringing their gift to the altar like nothing had happened. And Jesus said, no, 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 no. You need to leave your gift at the altar and reconcile with your brother. So this section, if you think about it, it's actually dealing with the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. The letter of the law was don't kill. The spirit of the law is, if you're not going to kill someone, or actually the word is murder, actually, don't kill them with your words. See? And that's what the Pharisees were doing. They were killing them with their words. They were abusing them. So that's what that part of the Sermon on the Mount was talking about. So later on in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus deals with how the recipients of the abuse should behave. That section I just told you about, that's dealing with the abusers. All right. You need to reconcile with your brother. You need to stop abusing, because it's a serious issue. But then later on, he goes through how to deal with being abused. All right. And that's where it gets into turning the other cheek and praying for them that despitefully use you and all of that. When I first became a Christian, I could not fathom that, because I was so angry at the world. I was so angry at being abused, and it affected me so deeply. I was so full of hatred and revenge that when I became a Christian, it was tough. And then later on, when I was offered to become ordained, I told them I'm not ready yet, because I didn't understand this. And I needed to understand this if I was going to be a minister, because I would have to advise people how to do it. And I didn't know how to do it. So that's why I got into this section, and it had to go pretty deep to understand it. So there's a section there where it says, you've heard it's been said, but I say to you, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite you on the right cheek, you turn to him the other one. Now, people don't understand what that means. That does not mean getting beat up. Okay? In our culture, we give people certain hand signals to provoke them. All right? To make a statement. Mm-hmm. In their culture, they would touch their cheek. And Bishop Pillai, who is an expert on biblical culture, said that if a woman touched a man's cheek like that, oh, it was terrible. It was like, you're worse than dirt. Okay? So if someone does something to provoke you, don't respond in kind. That is what turn the other cheek means. And then another technique that Jesus did is many times he gave multiple examples. All right. Here he gives multiple examples, and they're all stating the same principle. So he said, if somebody asks you to walk a mile, you walk 2, right? If somebody sues you and takes your coat, let him have your cloak also, all right? And give to him that asks thee, and that wants to borrow from you, and turn not away. Those things are all talking about the same thing. You see, what the Romans would do, they could walk up to somebody and say, you, carry this. That's what happened to Simon of Cyrene and the cross that Jesus bore. Okay? They said, you, carry this. So they had a rule that you could only, or would only have to carry it a mile. And believe it or not, they had mile markers on their roads. Okay, so you could tell it was, how long the mile was. Well, now, if someone came up to you, an abuser came up to you, a Roman soldier, and said, "You carry this," who's in charge of that situation?
The
The
soldier.
Roman soldier is, right? But if you said, "Sir, I will carry it too," now who's in charge of that situation? You are.
Mhm.
And that's the lesson that Jesus is teaching here, that the first step in having evil being overcome by good is to take the initiative where you are in control. All right. And see, another thing too, believers have wisdom that's available from God. And when you are in situations like this, God will give you wisdom. He'll tell you what to say and do. All right. James says that, if you lack wisdom, ask God to give all men liberally, and he upbraids not. He doesn't pick on you and say, you're dumb, I'm not going to tell you. No, he gives to all men liberally. And what's really interesting is in that list of the sonship rights and all that are in 1 Corinthians 1:30, wisdom is in that list, right? So we have as much right to wisdom as we do righteousness. Jesus died so we could have that righteousness. Well, he also died to give us a connection to God. So if you're ever in a situation like this, God will tell you what to do, and you can take the initiative away from the abuser by doing what Jesus said. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. See? And so then, the next thing he was talking about is when you are abused and you want to retaliate, well, he said we have to love our enemies and pray for them that despitefully use us. Now, that was tough for me to try to figure out. Yeah. Okay. And part of this is forgiveness. Okay. I explained last time we talked that forgiveness is a bridge that's off of that island full of despair. You have to cross the bridge to get to the mainland. And one of the steps that is involved in your healing, if you ever are abused like this, see, when evil occurs, it's like throwing a rock in a pool and the waves go out. All right. Well, if you respond in kind, then you're creating more waves. And what happens when you throw more rocks in that pool? The waves propagate and they build on top of each other. Right? They get worse. And there's something else that's called the cue ball effect. The devil hits the cue ball and it runs into you. All right. What happens on the pool table? That ball then in turn hits other balls and gets them going. And that's how evil propagates. But the cue ball effect stops with a believer with a renewed mind. The cue ball stops when you decide, I'm not going to retaliate. I'm not going to respond in kind and do evil for evil. All right. And it takes guts to do that. It takes faith to do that. And also you have to understand how this works, because if you obey what the word says, now obey is a strong word, but if you obey what the word says, then you will get the benefits that the word has. And there are definite benefits with this process. And so the first step is to forgive. Now, people think that you need to forgive the offender to their face. In most cases, that's what people think forgiveness is all about, right? But that could be a very toxic situation.
Especially
You
if
could,
they still want to abuse you. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so also it may not be available. They may be far away, they may be dead, they may be not available. But the model for this is actually Jesus on the cross. Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. He was praying to God on the cross. He wasn't confessing to them. He was not talking to them and saying, I forgive you. Okay. He was settling it between him and God. And that's the first step. And, you know, one of the obstructions to doing that is we may feel that that person doesn't deserve forgiveness, okay, because of what they did. This is all built upon that model, that expectation that when we forgive, we have to forgive them to their face. See, but no, the first step is doing it between you and God. And so, because of that erroneous model, the idea I think a lot of people have is they have to apologize first or do some kind of contrition before they're worthy of us forgiving them.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing is, forgiveness helps you far more than it helps that person. See, and I think part of it also was built when we were growing up, and if we did something wrong, our parents said, say you're sorry, stop, say you're sorry to them. Now, did we finally say we were sorry? Yes.
But did we mean it?
Did we mean it? Yeah, no, you know what I mean. We didn't mean it, did we?
No.
See, and so we expect them to be in the same boat that they don't really mean it. See, but so you have to deal with God first and be willing to forgive them between you and God. That, because forgiveness helps you far more than it helps that person. All right. Um, hopefully the offender will realize what they did and apologize. That would be the ideal.
Yeah.
Okay. But you know what? Even in our law system, if you forgive someone, do they still go to jail for what they did? Yes. So, see, forgiveness does not affect them as much as it affects you. But the trick is that the adversary has played on us is that we feel that we have to hold this until they're worthy of being forgiven. See? And what are you doing? You're holding that evil in your mind willingly. It's like keeping acid in you and not getting rid of it. You understand? Isn't that crazy? It's like having a sore and constantly poking it so it never gets healed, because you have to remember it. You foment all these bad thoughts. You get angry about it. Somebody says something that reminds you of it and you blow up. All of that kind of stuff. See, the nature of evil is it grows. Evil will not just stay by itself. Evil is not benign. It's like cancer. And so you have to treat it. See, if you had a wound, you need to treat it, right? Because what will happen usually if you don't treat that wound, it'll get worse.
Right.
Well, the same's true with your mind. There are things in your mind that if you don't treat them, they will get worse.
Now,
So,
what if somebody is afraid that forgiving somebody will enable them to continue abusing them?
okay. Now, of course, there's wisdom involved in this too. You want to get away from the situation so they won't abuse you.
Right.
Okay. That's what we were talking about the last time, where you report it. Now, see, when I grew up in the 50s and 60s, they were not aware of bullying like they are today. And so, thank God there are some anti-bullying initiatives, and it's much more in the consciousness of school administrators. But when I grew up, they didn't do much about it at all. And so in my case, that's why it was so severe and it built up so badly. But hopefully, if you report it, then you can get out of that situation. See, now the other thing though is, again, settle it between you and God. You don't have to forgive that person to their face. Okay, if it's going to be a dangerous situation, Jesus said, "Don't cast your pearls before swine." I think that was part of what he meant. Okay, so, but what I'm trying to get at is, if you deal with it in your own mind between you and God, then it causes you to have peace. That's part of, see, I have seen people who have not forgiven and they've held it in their mind, and evil spreads. It gets worse, and it has affected them for their whole lives.
So we're talking about the scenario where someone is no longer getting bullied and dealing with it after,
Right.
more than we are somebody who's facing ongoing.
Right. If you're facing ongoing, you need to report it so it stops.
Okay.
Yeah.
But afterwards, you got to deal with it.
Right.
Otherwise, like you're saying, evil reproduces, it grows, it festers.
Right. Exactly. So you need to come to peace with it. Okay. Now, like what we talked about the last time, we talked about sublimation, redirecting that energy, that chemical response, and you redirect that into something good. Okay. And when you start to get results for that, that's a confidence builder. That helps build your self-worth. Okay. One of the things that I did, when I didn't know that I was doing it, but I excelled at music, with trumpet and with vocal music. And so that built my self-esteem, and it counteracted the terrible things that people said about me. See, and I would not believe them. I would not. And part of that excellence that I had with music gave me confidence instead. So if you redirect and sublimate and turn that into excellence, then you'll have achievements that will help build your confidence. That'll help you in that situation. So forgiving between you and God is a very important step. In fact, in the Lord's Prayer, it said, "Forgive those who trespass against us, or forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." Right? Now, that was before Jesus died for our sins. Of course, now afterwards we confess to God, but still there is a relationship between that. You see, it is that important. I mean, physiology and psychology didn't change when Jesus died on the cross. Human nature didn't change. How people's minds work didn't change. So there is something to that, forgiving someone else. You understand?
Yeah.
It's that important. So,
What
but
about, I wonder if you've come across this, where somebody thinks that forgiving a bully is letting them get away with it, that there's
right.
an injustice here.
Okay. God will hold them accountable. God listens to the downtrodden. He is a merciful God. He champions the cause of those who are abused, that cry unto him. So if you cry unto him, God will take care of you, you see. And the idea of letting the bully off of the hook. See, bullies are dysfunctional to begin with, and they are suffering too. They're just suffering in a different way. And if they don't get treated, they're going to have a tough time in life too. They're going to lose out on opportunities. They're going to have problems with their family. They're going to have problems with their jobs because they just don't adjust properly. And so it's not letting them off the hook. It's between you and God. And it defuses you. It gets rid of the acid in you. See, the opposite of forgiving is having revenge. All right. And that's another thing that I need to deal with, because, also when it comes to forgiveness, you can't force somebody to forgive. That's abusive in itself. All right. And it's really abusive if the abuser wants you to forgive them simply because you're a Christian. That's terrible. But when you are vengeant, that's a further step of holding that evil in your mind, because not only then are you experiencing the hurt from it and rehearsing it in your mind, but also you're planning evil against the person that abused you, right? And so you, if you carry it out, you become the abuser you despise. You see, it's not logical to do that, to retaliate that way. You let God retaliate. See, okay, here's how that works. The nature of evil is that it's parasitic. There's that verse in Isaiah that said that God made light and he created darkness, and he made good and he created evil. I think it's Isaiah 45, verse 6 and 7 or something like that. And see, when God made light, darkness came into being as a consequence, because it's the opposite of light. It wasn't intended, but it came in. And so darkness is parasitic to light. When God made good, evil came in because it's the opposite. So evil is parasitic to good. All right. And so what happens to the evil one is, if they're not stopped, if they don't stop, that evil spreads within them. They get worse and worse and worse, until what happens is the evil consumes itself. Have you ever seen poetic justice? When someone falls in the trap that they made, when they get caught in their own lies, okay? That poetic justice, according to Psalm 9, is God's calling card. It's God's signature form of justice, because it says in verse 16, the Lord is known by the judgment which he executes. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. Okay? So when that happens, when they suffer that, the only one they can blame is themselves, because no one did it to them. They did it to themselves. You see? Now, if someone retaliated against them, then it would be like the cycle with the Hatfields and McCoys. It'd go back and forth and get worse and worse and worse and worse. See?
And it escalates typically.
Right, exactly. Exactly. But if they fall in the trap that they made, if they fall in the pit that they dug, it's their own darn fault. And they can't blame anyone. And it doesn't escalate. You see? And whenever you see that you can say, yep, God did that. See? So how do we turn on the switch for something like that to happen? You see, there's promises in the word that we teach people, all right? And we teach them, if you do this, then that will happen, right? There's a whole lot of things like that. If you believe this, then you'll get that result, see? Well, it's true with this too. If you obey what the word says here, then God will go into work for you to make that happen to them, okay? Where, see, there's a spiritual battle going on in the dimensions beyond what we are in with the five senses. It's raging all the time between the adversary and angels. They're fighting all the time. So when you believe God, they go to work for you behind the scenes and they work stuff, okay? That's how that happens. They open doors and they shut doors. The picture of it is like with Balaam in Numbers 22, where he was going down the wrong road and the angel was blocking his way. That's what happens. They shut doors and they open doors, okay? That happens behind the scenes. So do you want to turn on that switch? Do you want that to happen? Well, then do what the word says. Forgive them. Don't be vengeant. And when you obey that, that flips the switch. See? And you can be confident that God will work on your behalf. So that's why you don't need to avenge yourself. If you do, not only will you mess it up, but also you'll become the abuser that you despise. Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. See, the way the world teaches is totally opposite. The way the movies teach and all that, they say that revenge is best served cold, right? Well, you know what? The greatest revenge is living well. That's the greatest revenge. Now, of course, sometimes we can't live as if it never happened, because sometimes the evil that happened to us is so severe, it's so bad. I have a phone call here. Where is that? Okay. So anyway, you turn on the switch when you do what the word says. Okay. And so there's a cause and effect kind of situation spiritually with a lot of things. And so if you are vengeant, you'll mess it up anyway. You won't do it accurately. Plus, you'll set the cycle going and escalate it, and it'll get worse. See? God is the one that's able to make it work so that they fall in the pit that they dig, and there's no new waves. See? And so if we do that, we can rest assured that justice will be done. Now, I was saying that sometimes because of the evil is so severe, we can't live as if it never happened, because sometimes the injury is so bad. But you have to understand that eternity is a long time, and God will make it good for you in eternity. And so that's how it works. And we just have to have faith in that respect.
Yeah. I think if we presuppose atheism, this is not a system that's going to work. And I only say that because so often when we think to ourselves, we imagine a world in which there isn't God and there aren't angels and there isn't a spiritual realm. And, that's probably just cultural conditioning,
Uh-huh.
and it doesn't make sense to base serious decisions like whether or not to forgive someone, whether or not to let something go that was done to you years ago, on a worldview that you don't even hold. Because if
Yeah.
you are a Christian, you should believe that there is a God, that God is involved in the world and doing things, and that there are spiritual forces at work, and that um, there is this phenomenon you mentioned it a number of times where you fall in the pit you dug,
Yes.
and that reminds me of the Psalms. There's a lot of Psalms where the psalmist is talking about his enemies, and essentially praying that prayer. We might call it an imprecatory prayer, but
Hmm.
it certainly is a phenomenon well expected in the New
Yes.
Testament.
I
Uh,
think it's like 10 times in the Psalms that it
yeah,
has
quite a
that.
few times. So this is something that can happen.
Hmm.
Call it poetic justice, call it whatever you want, but
Hmm.
it's not our responsibility, is what I hear you saying,
Right.
to
See,
make it happen.
our responsibility is to do what God wants us to do your calling. When you do your calling, there's nothing greater in the whole world. That's your joy. So when you find out what that is and do it, then God heals you because he's already working in your life. If you're a prophet, God's telling you what to say to encourage God's people. Well, that spiritual energization that's happening in you has a bleed over effect. It will help you in your other situations, see, because he's already working in you for that. See, um, Paul was talking about that in Philippians chapter 1. But anyway, the the way this all works is if we looked at things from a truly spiritual perspective and saw the consequences, it would be a no-brainer
Right.
to do what the word says.
Yeah, I
See,
think a lot of folks are holding a grudge,
mhm,
and they're thinking, I can't let go of this because it would be wrong. So I'm gonna hold on to this,
mhm,
and I'm going to be better or more protected because I'm maintaining this bitterness.
right.
But it doesn't help you in life,
No,
right?
no, it does not. See, that's why you have to give it to God and get healed. See, it's like a splinter in your mind,
Yeah.
and you have to take the splinter out. Otherwise, it'll get infected, it'll get worse. See, and God will reward you for doing the right thing. Okay, those blessings are real. Um,
And
see,
would you say that you've experienced this?
oh, sure, you know,
Like with your story that you shared last time, you were pretty young, and is this something that you more or less dealt with like in your 20s, or that you waited later to face, or is this something that you do on a daily basis, or where maybe
well,
get a little personal, explain how it
see,
was for you?
I became a Christian in sixth grade, but I was not a knowledgeable Christian at all until I started going to Bible fellowships when I was 21.
21. Okay.
And but before I went to those Bible fellowships, I still was full of rage. I was angry. Um, I was going to do Breaking Bad. Okay, I was an organic chemist, and I was going to make drugs. I was planning on doing it. Um, and I could have been public enemy number one, but I got involved in the Bible fellowship, and they loved me, and they gave me genuine Christian love that I had never experienced in my whole life, and it changed me. And so I shed that anger, see, and I learned how to renew my mind and to deal with it. It took a while. It's not something that you have to work at it, okay? But if you work at it and do what the word says, then you get the results. And the results are that I stopped being so sullen and depressed and angry. My real personality came out. I developed an ability to relate to people and talk to people, and encourage people. And then, of course, another reward that I received is, this is funny. When I went to that fellowship and I crashed what I thought was a party, and it was a fellowship, and I got up to the top of the stairs, and the woman prophesied to me and told me that God would do 3 things for me. One of the things that she told me is that I would have, quote unquote, a far out mate, that I would have a wife. And see, that's something that I had agonized over for
And
years.
just to be clear, far out is like 70s lingo for really
Yes.
good.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly what she said, far out mate. And I married the most wonderful woman, the most beautiful woman, and she's just tremendous. And that's like a reward, I feel, for doing the right thing.
I see.
See,
and this is not something you carry decade after decade. You were able to get through it and close the book on it.
I carried it until my sophomore year in college. Then after this change happened,
okay,
then I was able to begin to shed it. It took about 5 years to do the process.
Okay.
Okay. But it works. All right. Now, the other thing is, see, this is a serious thing. If we saw things in terms of eternity, it would, like I said, it would be a no-brainer. That's why Jesus said that, you know, if you're on your way to he said it in Matthew chapter 5, right after that section where he said that they were taking their gift to the altar. He said, leave your gift to the altar and reconcile with your brother. And then he goes on to say that if you're going to the magistrate, settle the deal on the way to the magistrate before he delivers you to the jailer and all that stuff. Because you see, he was trying to illustrate the seriousness of this in terms of eternity. If you obey God, the rewards go on forever. And if you improve your plight, one small amount measured over eternity is huge. Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is praying for them that despitefully use you. Now, like we said last time, I tried every which way to try to interpret that as praying against them. Okay. I got out my Greek book. I looked at this and I looked at that. I tried every which way to try to see if that could be meant that way. And it can't. You have to pray for them. Now, because see, we would think that it would be like praying curses against them. But that's not a tool in our toolbox. Witches pray curses. We're not witches, okay? It's not a manifestation of the Spirit. To pray that way would just build the evil again, see? So we have to pray for them. Now, the ideal situation is like what happened to Paul, all right? Paul murdered Christians, right? And then he was on the road to Damascus and Jesus appeared to him, right? That's the kind of prayer that we pray for those people. Because you see, if you pray that way, then angels are going to go to work for you and work on them. Like it said, when Jesus told Paul, it's hard for you to kick against the cattle prod. All right. Well, and Paul said, yeah, that's what's been happening to me. Because if you do everything right, that's what they do. See, that's what gets energized. So again, there's hope. See, it's not like you have to grit your teeth and pray for them. No, you're praying for them to genuinely turn around. Because when it comes to eternity, you wouldn't want someone to be in oblivion for the rest for eternity, would you?
No.
Wouldn't you want someone to experience the joys of God and living forever? I mean, you wouldn't wish the other stuff on anyone, would you? So if you have a genuine heart, when you pray that way, it helps heal you. See, it helps heal you so that you are not bitter, so that you're not angry all the time, so that you have genuine emotions. See, what you put in your mind is what you get out. Garbage in, garbage out, good stuff in, good stuff out. So the whole package is how to be genuine. See, because otherwise, if you let those brain chemicals work for you and make you think the negatives, then you're just going to build that stuff more and more. But if you turn it around, that's how it works. And God rewards you. See, that's how the whole thing works. And so that's what I learned about how everything works. You have to forgive, don't be vengeant, and then genuinely pray for your abuser. That's what Job did. When was Job healed? When he prayed for his friend. See? And this was a genuine prayer. Now, you may never see the vengeance of God happen to them. You may have left them in your dust and moved on, okay? You may get to see it. If you do, that's a blessing. But if you don't get to see it, you can rest assured that they will be judged. So just move on and do what God has called you to do. Sublimate those negative feelings into excellence, see, and win the game. So that's my message. That's what I learned, and that's what turned my life around. And I think that it can do the same for many, many others if they apply these principles. And we can avoid some of these big blow-ups that are happening lately, that people get so angry, they feel they're trapped, they feel there's no way out, and then they explode with vengeance, like the movies say. See, and that's such a trick. I wouldn't recommend that on anyone. So that's how you defeat evil with good. So that's my message.
Very good. It reminds me of the last verse in Romans 12. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good.
Yeah.
And I think many of us, if we got really honest, many of us Christians, if we got really honest, we'd say we don't believe that verse.
Yeah.
And yet it's true.
Yeah.
And that is the plan of God. And that is what he's going to do with or without you. So might as well get on board. You know, even as risky as that sounds, to not.
Well, see, the mechanism works.
Yeah.
See, if you do, it's cause and effect, just like all the other promises of God.
Yeah.
It's cause and effect. And so if you do A, then B will happen. See, and so it's just that simple. Yeah. Even though it may seem to be hard, it takes the same amount of effort to do the right thing as it does to do the wrong thing. It's the same amount of effort. All you have to do is change the momentum. See, And then it'll become just as easy to do the right thing as it would have been to do the wrong thing.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
All right. Well, I love you. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Let me find the button here.